Good evening. This is the June 24th meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. I'll call the meeting to order at 7:04. Public comment. Hearing none. Review, approve. I had the summary of June 3rd, 2019, but we're going to table that until the next meeting.
Right, I'll get those written up. The video is online if anybody wants to see it. That did get posted up there, so they have been very slow at getting certain things posted, I think, but it is there.
Good. Next we have the meeting minutes, meeting notes from May 20th.
Well, it's been a while. I can read them if you'd like. I don't know if you had a chance to review them, which they're not very long, they're very short. So just quickly, meeting called to order at 7:03, no public comments, reviewed minutes from 4/8, accepted as written, unanimous vote. We discussed the Excel strategy tracker led by Chairperson Mike. And we reviewed the SMARTY definitions, and I spelled out the SMARTY definitions: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, inclusive, equitable. And those are all spelled out in the minutes. Discussion continued a review of a portion of the goals and strategies. The results were included in the Excel sheet documented by MR. The entire committee continued to struggle with how the goals and strategies were worded and the challenge of trying to evaluate them within the SMARTY approach, sort of the terminologies. So that's really it. And then we talked about select board scheduling. Francine suggested reporting to the select board should be included with the fiber optics presentation. Possible date, June 18th. Master plan implementation report at a joint meeting with select board. I realize that's different. Nonetheless, that was in the minutes. Next meeting, June 3rd. Adjournment made and seconded 8:12 p.m. So that's pretty much it. Is there any additions or corrections on that?
No. That's all correct. June 18th was the date originally, June 25th.
Okay, but for this
I
purpose,
had to look at my email.
okay, so minutes from, do you want to do a motion for acceptance?
I move to accept.
I second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Next we have review and rank goal and strategy matrix. So you had gotten through chapter 2.
Yes.
We are starting on chapter 3. Any updates, insights, changes to how we're doing this from last meeting to this meeting? I wasn't at the last one, so I don't know if we reviewed anything or...
No, I think we were still struggling with the one about time-bound.
Yeah.
I think we put ends in a lot of those as we went through last meeting.
Okay.
And a couple of them I think we marked as not specific as well. But we generally got through all of goal 2.
I think. Firmer in our...
Yeah,
Right, we reminded ourselves that
We can't all be winners.
intent is nice, but if you take the rest of the SMARTY and you really look at it,
yeah.
great idea, we're not even close.
Okay.
Yeah,
I like that though. I mean, are we, like as a town, are we even close to attaining something like that? It's a good way of looking
It's
at it.
on record, it's not like it can't be revisited, but
Right.
Yeah.
if we're just going to rubber stamp everything, we're not doing our work.
I mean, I think we realized we ended up talking too much about a lot of it and trying to flesh out what they meant.
We were trying to interpret what they were thinking. And it was
Realize
like we
it's
spent
Steve,
time.
Some of the
Jack
strategies.
Webbed.
I think we ran into a couple that were like,
Is it a-
that's not even relevant anymore.
Jack Webbed.
It's not even worth the time.
Remember the old Dragnet show, Just the Facts, man?
Just the fact.
I'm probably older than you are, yes.
Yeah. And then there were a couple, I think, we found that just were, very vaguely written, and a couple that could have been combined. And
Right.
So, but we generally got through it
Nice.
as best we could.
Good.
And my big challenge was getting it down and getting it out to people. Thank goodness it worked.
Yes.
It worked. It came over fine.
Francine
Yeah.
marked it, and as we went along, and that got out. And I think the only other, there was one follow-up issue. We were going to touch base with Virginia, and I haven't had a chance to see her, just to ask about, we were looking about, what was our question about whether CPA funds could be, how could CPA funds be used for affordable housing?
Right.
We didn't understand what what that included, and I didn't catch her this week at all.
Yeah.
So
I'm
that's
sorry.
just on the to-do list, whoever sees her
I'll see
first,
her
maybe.
Thursday.
But it was more, since we haven't used any of the CPC funds for affordable housing, that was one of the issues that came up, is like, what can they be used for? And I think
Right,
Jim, you had
and so
mentioned.
I'm on
Yeah.
the committee, and even I'm vague about it. I mean, one of the things we talked about in the Housing Authority is, we could buy property as a town and hold it and try to sell it as affordable housing, but there's risk that go with that. And so far, it was pretty unanimous that no one wants to own that risk, but that is an option. And then another reason we have so much funds is because we don't have any affordable housing. Some of the things we can spend it on, for example, you can buy appliances for the contractor, that reduces their costs. But if nobody's building anything, you're not spending any of your CPC funds on
Yeah.
that. So that's part of the reason there's a buildup, is because it's just
Yeah.
And what about the possibility of buying existing homes?
Mhm. So that's, again, that's something that we can do, but you probably want to create a trust, because there's the risk of holding that property as a town. If it doesn't turn over, or if there's
Yeah, rolling
some
it over.
disaster, or then insure it for a short period of time.
So anyway, we just
Flip or
It's
flop
not-
for affordable housing.
Right, you're flipping for affordable housing.
Yeah.
It sounds on paper, I'm sure it's doable, but
Town buy some
But
property.
behind a risk, I understand.
there's risk, and I think, frankly, when you look at as I see it, a small town versus a big town that maybe has a paid position to do this, you have a board,
Right,
a volunteer board, who's going to manage that.
Yeah,
That's-
exactly. So anyway, I
Have
think
to-
we just need to, catch up with
No,
Patty and
good
just find
question.
out what.
No.
When you find out, throw out this concept to her, because we've had 2 different subdivisions come before their planning board in the last 2-3 months. And in each case, they've come up with exactly 9 houses. So therefore, they don't,
So that's...
they don't fall under our
Funny how that
current
works.
zoning bylaws for, and I was talking to Chris about this the other day, and I asked the question, well, I didn't ask it specifically, because I will say the developer on the second one is extremely hard of hearing, and frankly, I'm not really sure he was with it, sorry to say. He's not a local guy. The first one is Ryan Gilher, who is, with it and has no hearing issues that I'm aware of. He wasn't there. But what we need to do is find out how a developer could utilize those funds to encourage to build them into something like a subdivision. That's really the question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to approach it?
I mean, the question, as we were talking, is not, why aren't you building the 10th unit? But rather, what would it take for you to build the 10th unit?
Yeah.
What incentives do you need to consider that? And
So like,
that was-
can we use that money to help fund?
So,
It's not a
again,
case of buying the land, because
Right.
the land is there. What they're doing is they're coming up with size of lots and basically saying, well, there's no more space. Well, granted, I'm not an engineer, but I can just say to myself, couldn't you just make these lots work a little differently in order to get the 10th one in?
In order to go.
This second subdivision was smaller than the first one. The first one, there's really no question that it would have worked. But then, as you've heard me speak about that before, there's been a concern that, maybe it wouldn't be attractive to a buyer if there was an affordable housing, and I can't define it any differently than that. So I'd really like to know what developers need to do to meet this hopeful bylaw that we have to bring in these kind of housing. Maybe
I mean, I
we
just
So-
think overall the housing market in this town is, people want to move here, so, yes.
This year's assessment values reflect that, right? I mean, everyone probably saw a decent jump.
Right.
But you do have the situation where people who have lived here their whole lives now can't afford to live here.
Right.
And I know a woman that I'm going to say fairly well. She's like in her 80s, tapped out. So she asked about affordable housing in this area, and in Southampton to stay, and there is none. So she went to Easthampton, and within 2 weeks, Easthampton got her a place. I mean, I know they're many times larger than we are,
Yeah.
but, to see this happen
Right, I just think that,
time after time, and it's going to increase because more and more people are now finding themselves in that situation, that we can't offer any alternative for people, to me is,
I know
maybe it doesn't have to be a standalone house. Maybe it could be, you know, a multiple family dwelling of, you know, a small one-bedroom studio kinds of
Well, we have to work
things.
that into our zoning bylaws, because our
Yes,
bylaws,
yes.
it might be a bylaw
Yes.
change.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, just say that's been a thorny issue that we still need to pursue.
So all of these things have been discussed by the Housing Authority, and we will continue to discuss them, just various strategies we have. I went to a Northampton housing conference, or mini conference one evening, and PVPC was there, so I spoke to the person who got the contact name, so
Who was that? Do you remember? Who was it?
Lori Tanner is the contact person. So I emailed her, I'm waiting to hear back from her. But maybe this committee can, do we have a contract with PVPC, or how does that relationship
So
work?
the town does, right? I mean, they have an agreement of sorts. They utilize them for different services, some grant-funded, some town-funded.
Right.
I just don't want to
Different
pursue
groups
assistance and
utilize
find
them
out
as
that they're
well.
going to build the town.
Well, I mean, the conversations are free.
Yeah, they're a business, they're looking for the business. DLTA, what does that stand for? That's the, you know, was utilized the funds for that in order to have the open space, the new open space report created. That was through PVPC. PVPC has, as you know, supported the planning board. It seems to be more or less on a case-by-case basis at this time. Because they've had some internal personnel changes, PVPC is about to change their major person. Did you see in the news that Wayne, what's his last name, who is the planning person in Northampton, is vying, Fiden, correct. He is
He's trying to be the
considered to be a
CEO.
final for that position of the executive director of PVPC. I hope it happens, because he's very much a planning-focused person and has done really great for not only Northampton, but he worked in Montpelier, Vermont before that. And I'm just thinking if he got that job, you know, we could sort of tap his expertise as part of PVPC.
I guess that's what I'm asking, you know, I can have conversations, but if we invite someone to a housing authority meeting from PVPC, are they going to charge us?
Yes, they are. They are.
Okay.
I mean, you need to establish that in advance. Would you be able to just come, or can you know, and you don't necessarily have a revolving fund, am I right? Do you have any kind of funding? You need to talk to Ed about
Yeah.
that, I think. as to-
When I contacted them, when this committee first got recreated, I called them because they had a major role in the development of the document and whether or not they could be of assistance. And they said that they would be, that they would even, I said, well, we really can't pay. They said they would even be willing to help us by going out and finding grant money that would pay them to
That's
work
right.
with us.
Yeah.
Which is what they primarily do,
So-
right? I mean, they do, the grants they find are, they're in a good way self-serving, right? It keeps them
Right.
going, keeps the
Right.
town project going, so.
They know how to, rather than reinvent the wheel, they just need to find a customer to put in the blank.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll see. But there are some options, including relooking at our zoning. It's a lot of different.
Along those lines, I'm going to just give you an update on that. I think I told you before that the planning board has been undergoing a bylaw review, including the zoning bylaws. And it's really fallen to the planning board more so than the ZBA. And I asked about that at the recent planning board meeting, and where are they and what's happening in the status. Because of some other conflicts and switches and changes, we're going to bring that up again. We're going to bring it out. So now's the time. They haven't come before town meeting, consequently, it's a good time to, and when I get a final copy of the changes, maybe we can look at those and see if we have comments.
Right.
There probably would be a public comment, you know, time, but it might be the right thing to do to.
Especially if they align or do not align with some of the master plan goals,
Correct.
right? I mean, the
That's
goals were
right.
established to be incorporated.
Yeah, that's correct.
Good. All right, so Chapter 3, Goal 3.1A. Develop a plan for the future use of municipally owned historic properties such as town hall and fire station. Work to determine the highest, best use of these properties and how to repurpose the buildings while keeping historical character intact.
It is specific.
Nope.
It would be measurable.
Right, because what they're asking for is a plan.
I think it's attainable. I do.
Plan would be attainable, for sure.
That's right.
Right.
I think it's relevant, for sure.
Did you put no in there?
Oh, I did, actually.
Definitely relevant.
Yes, relevant.
Time bound.
Same, we issue a time bound.
I think we should just skip time.
I think-
Yeah.
I wish
None of these are. have
Until we
date.
reword some of these, it doesn't work anyway.
you're worried about that.
And time bound may be, we talk about doing the second step of review. Time bound may be where we look closer at it and say, is it
Yeah.
1 year, 5 year,
Right.
10
The
plus?
time frame.
Yeah.
Inclusive?
Could
I
be.
don't know. Depends on what
What gets
it's
developed.
repurposed for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It could be inclusive.
Yeah, it could be.
A small Y.
Equitable
Same.
comes back to
Yeah.
same thing.
Let's see. All right.
They don't have a maybe in here?
Update old and outdated inventory sheets for properties, areas, objects, structures on the Massachusetts Historical Inventory. Is it specific?
It's a mouthful.
Yes.
It certainly is.
Measurable?
It seems to be.
Yes.
Attainable?
Yeah.
Relevant?
Yeah, I think so.
The other thing I would ask, and I guess
Historic.
it delves into it, right, so relevant. I guess, what are the number?
Right, it says
Of things
old
here.
and outdated inventory sheets. Are they all old and outdated? Just a few of them? I don't.
Right, because if there's 2 out of 400, it's certainly attainable, but is it sort of relevant at the moment? Would you put your effort somewhere else? I don't know.
Is this something we revisit on the second go through? Be like,
Yeah.
this is not a top priority.
Well,
I agree with that. Of all the priorities.
same with time bound.
Yeah.
I think it'd be nice.
I've
but-
never seen the inventory sheets,
So-
to know what's even on there, so.
No, I don't know
Unfortunately,
either.
Christina's not here to answer either.
And I mean,
She might know.
you're inventorying things that are older, so they've been around for a while.
They're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere, and you're not really gaining new ones. So it makes you wonder, like, when they initially did it, and let's say they stopped upkeeping this 15 years ago. Have they added anything in the last 15 years? Or was it captured?
What's the cutoff for,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Someday
being
my
added to?
1960s house will be on the historic.
But it sounds like something is already on the Mass Historical Inventory, right? From the way
Right.
it's structured, so.
Well, in terms of the concept, all these questions we're asking seems relevant to, like you said, what's the cutoff and how many on the inventory? Seems like a good idea. Should it be published? In fact, should it be something we can see on the town website? That kind of thing would be helpful to know what's on the inventory.
Yeah.
We could look at the Massachusetts Historical Inventory and see if that's a place to start.
Yeah,
We don't have our Megan here.
yeah, Megan, we need our quick little Google.
Yeah.
So, we're gonna, how about we leave relevant and time-bound blank?
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah.
yeah.
Inclusive.
I think we leave them all
I
four
think
of
that
those, please.
stays blank too. Those are question marks.
Same with equitable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would say it's equitable. You're historic or you're not. They're not going to exclude any of the historic properties, right?
Well,
You're right.
they might.
Well, you have a point.
What's historic? Like he just said, is it something before 1930, 1960?
Well,
Turn of the
the
century?
Historic Commission, they have definitions for
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
these are.
Yeah.
And so they follow their own definitions.
Yeah.
They're not going to say, oh my God, this house is a dump, even though it fits the definition, walk past it. I don't believe they would do that.
I wish Christine was here because I can't answer. I mean, I've just heard some stories.
Okay,
I don't
so
know the
we'll,
answer.
Okay, sounds good.
okay.
3-1C, expand number of properties, districts, areas designated on the national and state register to increase eligibility for matching grants for preservation work.
It's very specific.
Specific.
Yes.
It's very measurable.
Yeah.
should think I would think it's attainable.
Yeah, it sounds like it's just an inventory thing. If the
Yes.
definition stays the same as time goes on, more and more properties come under the...
Is it relevant and time bound?
Yes.
It's relevant, I think. I mean, right now, we've got the cemetery on the National Register, right? So to the extent there was any work to be done on the cemetery, then that might be eligible for some level of grant.
Inclusive?
Inclusive?
I think
I
as
guess
you-
it's...
And
Waited too long.
as long as you're talking
But
about
I mean,
expanding,
yeah.
I mean, if you're expanding, the
But-
theory would be that you'd be more inclusive, I suppose.
You're inclusive, but by definition,
Yeah, by the definition set by the National State Register.
which
Right,
we don't control.
Right.
Right.
So I would say it's inclusive, because the goal is to put more on there.
And then equitable.
I would say yes, but I don't sit on the committee. I can't.
How about needs further review on that one, too? Needs further
Ruther.
review.
The review.
There we go.
It's a new member of the
Say,
committee.
pull it down.
Create a community group to help connect private owners of historic properties and coordinate historic preservation efforts throughout town. Is it specific?
Do we have a community group?
So when we got to relevant, this would probably be the one where I'd say no, because we have two historical groups in town that I think
Right.
should be filling those. And maybe this is something that's already complete. We just didn't
yeah.
complete it, right? But I would think two historical centered groups in town would kind of fill this function.
I agree.
I'm going to put possibly complete. Because if you were to do a third group, it'd be comprised of the members of the other two groups. Realistically, right?
There's no reason to do it.
I think we have a local historic district.
Yeah,
Strategy 320.
Yeah, I wanted to check.
Yeah,
I thought we did.
I don't know the history of, if those districts are that new that they would post this report, or...
Yeah, but remember, there was something Christina talked about that I thought we didn't want to have a historic district, because then that really does, in one of our early meetings, 'cause that really puts lots of restrictions on what anybody can do to their house.
That's
I
right.
mean, in terms of the outside, whether
Yeah.
you change the light bulb, whether you, I mean, there's so many restrictions. I thought, maybe she was just talking about a certain part of town that, down in the center here, that could qualify maybe for historic, but then decided not to because it was too restrictive. But up along your street, isn't that historic there?
There is a sign there, it's a historic district, yeah.
So adopt a local historic district in identified areas. So local historic districts are more effective in preventing inappropriate changes, inappropriate changes than a national or state registered district. By establishing the district, a community can appoint a local LHDC, which reviews proposed changes to architectural features visible from a public way within the district boundary.
Yeah, so I think what this is you can create a local district that's locally...
Well, it's a commission that governs what you
That's
can
right.
do to the
And
property in the
becomes kind
area.
of Uber, what you're describing.
Right.
I think just saying this is a national historic district, basically just it's recognized. I don't think it restricts what you do to buildings, but then you can set it within a municipality, a town, your own.
Okay.
Like I think, for example, Elm Street in Northampton is that way. And like I said, certain colors for paints, et cetera, it's very,
Right.
very restrictive. So that's interesting that this recommends that.
Local historic districts are regulated under MGL Chapter 40C. So yeah, it's a separate entity in and of itself that manages.
The question is, why is this on here?
So if it's on there, is it because we don't have one then?
We don't have one, but it was, did the survey, did the respondents recommend it? Did they want it? Or is it? Because we're
Well, they
making
included-
assumptions
yeah.
that we don't
Yeah,
want it.
yeah.
But according to this, somebody wanted it, right? It wouldn't be on this sheet if it,
Right.
Yeah, I'm just trying to recall one of our early conversations when we first started our meetings here.
I think it's important that we get Christina's input
Yeah.
on these, on this whole
Exactly.
group right here.
As the,
And we're
yeah,
kind of
as the-
flailing around here a little bit.
I agree. I mean, does it
Yeah.
make sense to skip this section? And-
I'm okay
I
skipping
feel we
it.
should defer, yeah. All
Maybe
these
defer chapter
historical-
four.
Because she would have all the history, right?
She does, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Good part of it.
Because I would think,
Like, for example, the demolition delay bylaw, that's already been done, right?
That's done.
right, that's a good point.
So just a note
We have
on
an expert
the,
on our, I don't, do you know what she's doing? She couldn't make it.
Christina, yeah, she said she couldn't make it.
just a note on the inventory of historical items for the town. There
Uh-huh.
are around 375 things on our list for Southampton.
Oh,
You're good.
where'd you find it?
It's on the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Information System. And it is mostly houses and gravestones. So each individual gravestone has
Falls under three,
a marker.
Well, you know, I think Mr. Richard Frary has been working on helping with historic identifiers of the gravestones.
For the veterans.
Oh, it's only for the veterans?
Veterans
saw.
only, I think.
Okay.
And there is, by the way, Judith Conlon's doing a presentation on the
Yes.
gravestones on Thursday night.
That's right. And
Should be
she's
very
part of this,
interesting, actually.
oh, she's part of the cemetery commission.
She is.
Yeah.
Should be very interesting. though.
Yeah.
And I do feel like some of these houses aren't around anymore.
Well, one of them was
So-
demolished, what, 2 months ago?
So I don't know
Yeah.
how
Which one is
much
The one on
updating
Route
there
10?
actually
The
might
one on
have to
10?
be.
The one that was
Flooded out.
flooded.
No.
It was
It's from the
condemned.
early 1800s.
Yeah.
Which,
Right before Pure Food on the left,
If you were to drive
across from
to the barn,
Gillinger's.
it was red house, small red house. It now has a trailer out there that says for sale.
Yeah, I think let's defer chapter 3 and
I think so.
swap
think
over and
so.
try chapter 4 and see if we can do any better.
Yeah,
Chapter
I-
four?
So I think
yeah,
there's just so much
she would
that
have so much
she's got the history
Mm-hmm.
that we don't have, it, so we can be
Okay.
spinning our wheels on that.
I make a motion that we skip chapter 3 and move along to
Second.
next chapter.
Sure. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Strategy 4-1A, hold a series of public presentations about the benefits of smart growth policies that concentrate development in some places and discourage it in others.
It's a little big.
Specific.
Well, it would be specific, wouldn't it? I mean,
Well, I say,
presentations are specific.
Smart growth
Content.
policies sounds kind of open-ended, but I know what they're saying. They're talking about,
Right.
well, when you use like
Fill
some
and-
places and discourage it in others, it's not specific.
Right.
Well,
Right?
wait, smart growth policies is a specific thing. It is
yes.
it is very
And it's
specific.
appropriate for some
Right.
areas and not others.
Right. So the policies themselves are specific, and to hold a series of meetings, that's a specific
Yeah.
action to be done.
What's the goal?
And the result of those meetings would be, you'd want to do smart growth here,
But not,
but not here.
Well, okay.
What's-
I
what's-
really don't, I don't understand smart growth myself.
Well, what's not specific about it is who's going to lead these public presentations? Who's the expert on smart growth? So that's,
That's where I would think, get a, subcontract arrangement with PVPC, because that's what they would do. Wouldn't be anybody here.
Right.
Somebody knowledgeable about it, that's done it before.
Yeah, and you would want an external person doing it.
yeah.
Objective,
Yes,
not
yes.
a landowner or a homeowner.
So see, I guess I'm just like comparing it to like the next strategy, which is much more specific to me.
Yeah. Well,
Well, put it, so you can't, when I read strategy, the first one, right? Or the one we're talking about, you can't go do it today because you don't have enough information. Like you can't, and the master plan doesn't provide you enough information either, right? You have to look at all the zoning in all the areas and review all the documents and compile, create a presentation to figure out where you want it, right? I mean, I can't imagine the intent of this is to hold a series of public presentations for the public to tell you where to build and not build.
No, it's to educate the public
Right.
about
Yeah.
About the
what it
policy of
is
smart
Right.
growth. Yes.
and its benefits.
Kind of like the open space meetings that have been done.
Exactly.
I mean, it's the same
Right.
idea,
Yeah.
sort of.
It's
But open
nice.
space is determined, though,
Well,
right? It was determined in the intent and the direction the town is going in is sort of determined and set, right? There is kind of a path in which we're pursuing open space. I don't know. To me, and I do agree, I don't think this is specific enough because the background work hasn't been done yet. Where are we, for instance,
I
going
mean,
to
if it was more of
utilize
a
that?
general, hey, we just want someone to present
I think we need to be
information on
educated
smart
around it.
growth
I think that's how I
techniques.
interpreted your statement, kind of like the open space. The open space conferences you attended they educated the people that were present. They weren't all landowners of large tracts. And it was very informative, even though not everybody is going to elect to do an APR or elect to put their land in some kind of a conservation status, and that's fine. I think I read this as we need to do a series of presentations on what is a smart growth policy and include certain boards and committees, but also town people in general to become educated around what the concept is. I think that's what I interpret from what you just said, Chris, about like the open
That's
space
how I was reading it,
conferences.
but,
Yeah, to me, it's just I see it the same way also. It educates a number of target audiences about what's smart.
So I think in terms of the SMART here, it is definitely specific, it's definitely measurable, it's certainly attainable, absolutely relevant, time-bound now. It's inclusive and it's equitable, I think. This looks like a very important one, and the second one does too. B.
I guess the only one I question is relevant.
Really?
Well, the only reason, taking my own personal perspective out of it, and saying if it's so important, why hasn't it been done yet? It's interesting that
Well, because we're doing nine-unit subdivisions instead of 10. Talk about smart growth.
well, that's part of it, but smart growth talks about, developing your commercial
Right.
and
Yeah.
Other things too.
it's very broad,
Yeah.
more than just affordable housing. So we pursued a grant funding for the whole land use thing, but not this. Isn't that interesting? Why is that?
It's not inclusive.
Well,
Well, I'm wondering, is it just we didn't realize it, or?
I think that's what you're hitting on. We didn't realize it, it hasn't surfaced as a priority until perhaps quite recently. It kind of got put aside, just like the entire master plan got put aside. That's kind of all I
Maybe.
do.
It's also easier to tackle. I mean, if you think about it, purchasing a piece of open space for conservation versus laying out how you're going to develop your town, right? One's easier than the other. Not saying it's easy, but how to get there to the end result is definitely easier, I would think. Because if you're going to dictate where we do commercial development versus residential development
Yeah.
and pick tracts of property to then determine this should or should not be happening here, I mean, that's a difficult task, and it'll be a difficult concept for residents to do, right?
Agreed. But I do think it sets boundaries, and if you really do that, then
But
you
then it's-
set boundaries for zoning and everything else.
But zoning would then be the enforcer of this and not granting variances.
That's
or not
correct.
issuing special permits. I mean, because if they do something like that, that just subverts any plan. So what holds them to making whatever decisions we have about smart growth? Hold them
I'm
responsible.
not sure what you're saying.
When people want to do something and they want to take a residential piece of property and ask for a variance to make it a commercial piece of property, they just go to the planning board. And so in essence, the planning board would be,
The zoning.
not the planning board, the zoning board.
Zoning board, yeah.
Would be the gatekeeper, more or less. But as long as they would continue to give variances, what's the point of having something like this?
The zoning board's not even listed as the
Because-
responsible party.
I see that.
That's
And that
interesting.
doesn't make any sense.
Well, I guess what I'm saying, if
The
you-
school department is.
I saw that too, I know.
I think local cable access.
Let's add zoning.
So for me, what smart growth does is it sets a current and long-range plan for the
Yeah.
town that gives boundaries to what the
Right.
zoning, right, and so without that, whether the zoning board allows a variance or not is kind of, roll the dice.
Right.
Who's on the board today,
Yeah.
who's on it
Right.
next year?
They don't have any guidance to go by. in
This
a
would give
sense.
it the guidance and the boundaries.
But they,
And
but
also kind of the inform, what's our intent for the town, long range?
but would they be bound to making the decisions based on this? Or is it still
I think
Well, but
that's-
bylaw, if
their
it's bylaw,
option
it's
of
bylaw.
deliberation to?
It's
So
bylaw, and
it would
you
be-
can have language that doesn't allow variances in certain zoned and bylaw areas, right? Like, you can do non-variance related
Okay.
restrictions in your bylaws, towns just don't do it.
Or you require a certain procedure for that variance that
Right.
goes beyond the zoning board.
So if we adopted, a series of smart growth policies in the town, would we then have to visit, along with really the zoning board, maybe we rezone all kinds of land?
possible.
I mean, we have very few commercial spots. Maybe we
right.
say, you know what, this whole track is commercial now.
But we've already talked about some of the barriers to just saying this whole tract is commercial. We don't have a wastewater system, and we don't have other kinds of infrastructure that's there. But what it would do is help us to kind of zero in on what the needs are and what the barriers are. Are you okay with it?
Just look at the
She's looking at the zone.
I should-
No,
looking at the
I
TV
thought
and-
maybe there'll be something, that this is all chapter property. All right,
Yeah.
okay.
Watch your step.
Because those
Really,
are,
your
yeah.
head, your feet, it's quite a dance you're doing there.
So I
Who's
think
your
that
agile?
in terms of the strategy of 1A, it would help raise up the issues, identify what the needs are, what has happened, what didn't happen, flesh out the resistance somewhat, so we can know, is the town ready to move forward on this? And if it has to do with zoning changes, if it has to do with bylaw change, is there an issue with variances being offered that are, agreed to that,
Make
are
this
not
all-
consistent with our full plan?
It would make it all fresh again, bring
It
it to the
would
consciousness
absolutely
of the
make it all
town. The
fresh.
town can decide, we don't want to do smart growth, or we do.
All right, back to goal 1. Is it specific?
Absolutely.
I think it is.
Is it measurable?
Yes. Everybody agree?
I think so.
I look for like head nod.
In the terms of just like presentation,
Having meetings and, I think it is, yeah.
Attainable?
Yes.
Relevant?
Relevant?
Yes.
I think so.
Right, well, we're also talking about relevant to the overall goal.
Right, well, I think the relevance is even, you
What's relevant?
could learn from a series of presentations that the town does not want to have smart growth. It's still
There you
relevant.
go.
Yeah,
Depending
this
on
is
who it
that
is.
This
whole
isn't
rural
the
character
answer, this
thing
is
again.
just educating
That's right.
people on the question.
I mean, I think it is relevant to this goal and also overall, just because we are kind of at this point where it's like, do we explore expanding the infrastructure and looking at commercial?
Or how many more developments are we gonna,
Right.
accept? Or are we gonna put a moratorium on something? Or are we gonna,
some ways, this-
actively, we've got the ad hoc open space committee, maybe we need an ad hoc, whatever, economic development committee or something.
Well, that'd be nice, yeah.
What do we,
Right.
we don't know what we want, I think,
So
as a
we
town.
certainly talked about this topic in various forms at these meetings repeatedly.
Yeah.
And if it kind of all seems to culminate under the umbrella called smart growth, I think it's extremely relevant.
And maybe a lot of the ones we look at roll up under that, right?
Yes.
Exactly. These
And to
are
do
all
one, you
listed.
need to do one, you need to do all, or vice versa, right?
Right,
To
I
do
mean-
all of them, you need to do this one.
Half of what we've talked about is, is
Right, some of the
I
ones
would
we've
say
talked about
businesses-
fit
I would
under
say-
here, right, we spent a lot of.
I would say then it's time bound.
Time bound.
Mhm.
I mean, this is like step one.
Yep.
Inclusive.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Especially if you put it And the model we did for open space before the town, it's
Equitable.
Yes.
Hold a series of public presentations about the benefits of cluster development or the building of homes closer together so that the remaining land on a site can be protected as open space or farmland. This is specific.
Yes.
Measurable.
this is actually done a little bit in the open space. They talked about this a little bit.
Attainable.
Yes.
Time bound.
It also feels a little redundant. It could be considered smart growth or not.
Right.
Yeah.
We've kind of run into that before. The first one's kind of like an overarching thing, and then everything just kind of falls under it.
Review the zoning bylaws and update regulations to better protect priority natural resources and farmland.
What's a priority natural resource? Like a pristine waterfall?
Well, like
Our
water
water recharge.
Water in general.
Our water
It
recharge.
can be a lot of different things, like you said, water recharge area, a stream, a river, a lake.
Right.
That's very hard to define, really, because some people might think it's great to have walking trails and hiking trails and
Waterfront
horseback.
property. Waterfront property.
I think it's tough because you
Waterfront
say
property, swale
update
front
regulations to better protect.
To better protect prior,
Yeah.
To what level?
are they not protected now?
For someone who does a lot of work in sort of right-of-ways in rural areas, natural resources are pretty well protected. Now, you may not,
Is
you may be,
DEP regs, right?
you may be ignorant of the regulations, and even as a town ignorant of them, but
They exist.
if you follow the letter of the law, it's very difficult to do work adjacent to natural resources.
Right, you'd have to, even if you're a town and you're ignorant, you hire a contractor to build a road or whatever, they've got to apply, and then DEP comes in, and they're the ones who are going to set that standard, right?
We file permits to put in utility poles, which are 2 foot in diameter, if they're within 10 feet of a wetland. And we literally disturb this much dirt. Drill down, dirt spills over on the top, and we walk away, and the pole will be fine for 50 years. We file applications for those. Some towns don't even know that why they're receiving the application, because they're just not aware that we have to do that.
Were you ever denied?
Generally,
Because
No.
towns are too ignorant to know?
No, I just think it's, I mean, it is for a general public utility.
Yeah.
And we are,
As simple as probably not worried about.
we do have state exemptions for some work because it's a necessity, right?
Yeah.
It's not, they're not like egregious exceptions, it's just that we can do work in certain areas.
Can I ask a question about that?
Transmission gets denied just because it's a little more involved, right? Bigger right-of-ways, bigger poles. You know, they probably move more around protected natural resource areas, endangered species types issues. They do more shuffling than we do.
Talk about they versus we. Who are you and who's they?
So I work for Eversource, right? So we do,
Okay.
I would do distribution work, so the small, short wood poles.
Okay.
Transmission are the tall steel ones.
Okay, so here's the question. At this recent planning board open hearing for the second of the 2 subdivisions that are proposed for Pequot Road, there is a variance, is that what you call it? A right-of-way.
Easement?
A right-of-way easement
Easement.
for
If it's on personal
the
property, it's
tall
an easement.
poles at the end on White Loaf. Do you know what I'm talking about? And one of the abutters came to the meeting with reasonable questions about, and I thought reasonable, about there's a lot of people with ATVs that are going in and out around those poles. And how, she's not very thrilled about that. I mean, loud noises and exhaust, and it's not her property, she's an abutter, but it's going to cross this. Now, what are the rights for people to go around those poles? And I mean,
Depends who owns the property in
well, the
general.
property owners are the ones selling it and are going to be developing it. They're sitting right next to her. I don't think she didn't even know who they were because they don't even live in our town. It wasn't you. I was just doing that for example.
Oh, I was like,
But
it's like, oh, yeah.
I was just going right next to her. And I didn't have the answer to that, Mike. So, I
Yeah.
mean, nobody did. So
I mean,
it would be up to a
those easements-
property owner to say, no trespassing?
Yeah, I mean, we own some of them, right? So we usually post, danger signs and things.
Yeah.
But we have gates in some areas, depending on where it is in the community.
Yeah,
It's next to sort of,
Just not police, though.
yeah, it's just not, there's
that's right. It's not
thousands of miles
police.
across the state.
That's right.
You
And
know,
as a hiker, I will say that sometimes our hiking trails go around those open, clear-cut, it's
Some of them
great.
are really nice
Yeah, they are.
hiking trails. Like,
Yeah.
if you go in some of the higher areas like Ashfield and Cold Rain,
Correct.
they're very
That's
nice
exactly
trails.
where we were. Correct. Okay, well, anyway, so it has to be posted, sorry about that.
But yeah, and those easements are decades old, probably like from the 50s. We have some that are from the 20s.
Yeah,
So that property's exchanged hands 4 or 5 times, and there's usually always still easement language in there. So.
okay.
Review the zoning bylaws and update regulations to better protect priority natural resources and farmland.
So, this is a strange one to me, because it assumes that the two are not already protected.
I wonder if the word protect should be, so from the previous two, I wonder if this is language not stating the obvious, looking to change zoning bylaws to restrict development in close proximity to these areas and on farmland. That's what I would ask, right? Because if you have an open farm field, the farmer owns the field, there's nothing really to protect because he owns the property. But what would you protect in that stance, right? Because if the property owner is utilizing it for the farming purpose, then it is essentially protected.
I mean, I get from that, like, this is where APR comes in. I feel like this is kind of getting at, like, APR doesn't exist in this realm. I'm like, well,
See, for me, this is
a lot
not
of
very
farmers-
specific.
I don't think so.
I don't think it's specific.
I'm just
either.
looking at these maps that we have here. This is,
If you need another one, I'll bring it over.
pardon?
If you need one over there, I'll bring it over.
Yeah.
But, no, I'm just looking, and here's the water resources, here's the
The
farmland
farmland one right here, yeah.
right here. And I'm looking at the legend, and
And that's my thing. This wasn't
Yeah.
created so long ago that a lot of the current protections we have.
I guess we'd
don't-
have to match this up with
place.
that. I mean, what are the bylaws and the restrictions against these are new, brand new, so these are current.
Yeah, they're brand new.
So there would have to be some
They're current. These came
documentation
from,
that supports that.
Kestrel.
So,
Kestrel.
I feel we're slipping into where we did before. We're
Okay.
starting to,
Okay.
Change it.
well, we're trying, no, I'm not saying,
No,
I'm just saying
no, I hear you.
that we're trying to anticipate what they meant, we're getting away from
What it says.
what it says and what our intent here. This is not specific enough. It doesn't mean we could guess and project what the intent might be, and it might be good, but we're starting that slippery slope. It's, for me, one person, it's not specific enough.
I agree.
Well, I would agree it's not specific.
I agree.
It's not specific, is it?
So,
No.
no,
Hard to measure.
hard to measure, yeah, they kind of go together.
Attainable.
No.
Because how do you know if you attained it if it's not measurable? They're kind of relevant.
So a no on specific really,
Yeah, I feel like if it's no specifics.
I mean, from an overall topic,
Sure.
is
I
it
think it's
relevant?
Yeah.
But even then, I take the
Is it?
protection of the priority natural
Yeah.
resource, like that, to me, knowing what, like, we go through all the time at work, like, it's kind of done.
Yeah,
I mean, outside of expanding buffers or restricting more,
right. Right, the state has rules, and the Department of Environmental Protection has rules. You can't usurp those, you can build them.
right,
But this doesn't say that. Again, it's not specific.
so is it relevant?
No. In my opinion.
Not time bound. Because you can't put a time frame on something you don't know. Inclusive, equitable.
I mean, can it be those things if we don't?
You don't know enough? All right. Promote the use of Southampton's agricultural preservation district.
Use of. Excuse me for a moment.
What is
The
the use?
use of the district. I mean, so much of this, this whole chapter is dealing with open space.
Does that
which
mean promote,
Is it agricultural?
does this mean, again, we're speculating, it's not specific. Does it say that Southampton has an agricultural preservation district and we should encourage people to farm it?
Let's see what the legend
I don't think we do, because we don't have, our land is not even classified as agricultural land here. It's all residential or residential village or commercial. I mean, for a farming town,
That's right.
to not even be zoned
That's right.
agricultural was a big surprise to me. I didn't realize that it didn't even
Right.
exist.
Well, I think that's because we were a farming town, but we're
Right. But
not.
not anymore. I mean,
Except that one of the very first things in this whole master plan is that this town wants to maintain its
Yeah.
agricultural
Well,
field.
and if you go back to goal, the goal part of that up above, the 4.1, it talked about retaining the rural character. So that's what this is all about, is that whole
Yes.
notion of open space. This whole chapter is really dealing with open space.
Let me see if I
But
can
as I
find
said from the
something.
beginning, this idea that we're a rural town is just a fantasy, in my opinion, in people's heads from 50 or 60 years ago. If you look around, we're not a rural town.
Well, it's taken off in a way that is
Right.
inconsistent with it. Yeah.
That's what I miss. People want to but it's hard, you can't turn back that clock.
No, we're just saying that, goal 1 is just really, the whole chapter is open space. It's the whole thing is related to
This is
our
our
open space
vision.
initiative, which
We're going to be,
we seem to be moving on fairly well, which is why we have all these pending actions here.
Well, there's no agricultural
There's not an
preservation
agricultural
district in our
district, I know.
bylaws,
there wasn't so long
in the
ago.
zoning bylaws.
5 or 6 years ago.
No idea what you're talking about.
I don't know the geography well enough to tell from this map, but there are
We live in Southampton.
sections here.
Wasn't even,
I wasn't informed or not, but it's protected in perpetuity. So I don't know whether or not that's the green, the light green, whether or not that's inclusive of any farmland. I know you're saying there's no bylaw, but maybe.
What are the choices there? I can't see it, Francie. What's the legend say?
The
Which is,
green is the
it's
protected
61,
in
61A,
perpetuity.
61B.
Yeah.
61A and B is not protected in perpetuity. Only the ag preservation restriction is. Chapter 1, 61A and B is only a tax relief. It is not protection until you do the conservation
The
restriction.
green is protected in
The green,
So that's gotta be
whether or
APR.
not that
That's it.
overlaps
That's gotta be
or
the
is
APR
farmland, I
That's-
don't know.
That's Gun Road. Where the,
So
where
do
the
we
railroad
have an
crosses, the big
agricultural
green
preservation
crosses in the
district?
I don't think we do.
Not as a district.
Not as a district.
But we have
We're not zoned.
certain,
I don't-
certain lands have APRs on them.
middle. Right.
Yeah.
For instance,
Let me look in our.
For example,
this is Glendale Road, Cynthia. It's all green.
yeah.
Trying to think of-
On our conservation land map that somebody put together very nicely, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 parcels of land that are classified as APR land.
It's a little dated.
No, I don't think it's updated,
No? Okay.
because it's got, well, it's got Cross, it's got Fowler, it's got Fournier, Gdanzik, Kinnicky, Searle, Shield, Zipta Fletcher, 13 acres. So that's right across the road there. So this, I mean, so it's, the only thing that's really preserved technically is the APR lands. So,
I mean, I can't find an agricultural district.
I don't think we
in
actually
our
have a
master-
district per se.
Even in the master plan we're working on, so.
I don't believe there's a district per se.
Is it so specific enough if it doesn't exist?
No, how can you promote what doesn't exist?
Yeah. And none of our
Well,
zoning.
again, if we get lost in the intent, like we should have one, I
Right.
think we're losing
Yeah.
the purpose of why we're here.
It is,
And also, if we're pursuing this without having the agricultural preservation district, right, if we're pursuing preservation without this title, then do we need the goal? Right, if we're doing what the goal wants us to do without actually having the title, then why do we need the goal?
right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we're doing what it wants us to do, it's specific agricultural preservation.
Well, I want you to set up a zone to preserve, right? If we're preserving, someone's alarm is going off.
I don't know.
Not here.
Promote land
could steal
use
my truck
policy,
if you
so
like.
if you don't,
I have an alarm.
I have one, but I didn't set it though.
Like, my truck doesn't come with an alarm key.
Could be requested.
Okay, so on page 163 of the master plan, it talks about zoning issues, and the following items have been identified by the planning board and/or master plan committee as zoning issues. Format and accessibility of zoning bylaw. In addition, some items or areas of the regulations are not adequately described and should be clearly defined in the definition section of the bylaw. Finally, there's the case where regulations establishing an agricultural preservation district was adopted but never physically inserted into the zoning bylaw. The town should consider a complete update to its zoning bylaw to make the development process clearer and more transparent for all. So,
Well, there you go.
so it was adopted but never put in the bylaws?
Then it wasn't adopted.
Right,
That
so
doesn't make any
how's-
sense.
I don't know how serious.
Oh, can you imagine it being adopted at town meeting? That's what I think what you mean by adopted.
Right,
Someone
it was
put a motion-
accepted but never put to a formal
Yes,
vote to be
right.
included.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, if it doesn't actually exist, then what's this? The town adopted regulations in 1990 that established the ability for lands to be designated as agricultural preservation districts and required residential subdivision within these districts to be in the form of a farmland cluster development. The existing zoning map does not show that any agricultural preservation districts have been established, although the Jarrett Court subdivision off of Line Street reportedly resulted from implementation of this bylaw. This may be due to the fact that under the 1986 regulation, agricultural land can only be designated as an APD upon prior written approval of the property owner and adoption by town meeting vote.
What was the name of the, I guess the building layout?
The Jarrett Court subdivision?
No, so if you're building within a farmland, you have to lay out your subdivision. What was that? There's a certain way they want you to lay out the subdivision.
Farmland cluster development.
Google that.
Because I'm just curious what it's supposed to look like.
This is sad.
No, the internet speed is sad.
Although
This is-
lawfully
this whole
adopted,
thing
it
is-
is absent from the publicly available zoning bylaw.
I'm connected to the.
So lawfully
Church.
adopted, I mean, it got voted in at town meeting, right? Probably.
I guess, it's lawfully.
I'm sure the planning board isn't looking at this.
Yeah,
This is
right.
very
Few
upsetting.
people in general seem to know about these regulations. This may be the reason why there are farmland cluster development standards that are different from the cluster development standards mentioned in the previous sections.
Let's see what it looks like.
I don't know how we legally adopt something. It doesn't.
Because
Drop the
they
ball.
call one of these new subdivisions Gill Farm, Fitch Farm. There's
Right,
two of them.
right.
These are farms. Now granted, they're very treed lots at this point. Nobody's farmed them in decades, so they're all covered in trees now. But this did not come up at all.
So specific.
I'm very confused by this.
I am extremely confused.
I mean, you just want to change it to
Do we have
adopt.
an agriculture, we've adopted an agricultural preservation district, but it's not.
So this might help upon searching this master plan later on. We'll get to it, but we might as well talk about it now. This is going to be strategy 82B. Insert adopted regulations for agricultural preservation districts into the zoning bylaw and revise regulations to clarify its intent and make consistent with regulations in other areas of the zoning bylaw, such as the cluster development provisions.
Clarify its
Okay.
intent.
So that,
So,
Suddenly this seems becoming, what I first thought was not relevant because we don't have it. Suddenly it seems very
Right.
relevant because
It's just
we
later
do
on.
have it.
Later
We just
on,
don't
we
know that
Just
we
ignored
have
it.
Yeah.
right.
Don't know about it.
Yeah, don't know or ignore it, yeah.
So is it specific?
I mean, if it exists.
We don't know because we don't know what it is.
Well, my other thing, right, so
Right.
he just, the language in strategy 8 dash whatever it is says that you need to basically realign the intent, right, or review, and so are we, They insinuating you have
Insert
to.
the adopted regulations for this district into the zoning bylaw and revise regulations
Revise.
to clarify its intent and make consistent with.
Which means it's bad to begin with.
Right, so it's clearly, they know it's not clear anyway.
Right, these two goals sound like a real slap in the wrist. Hello, people.
Like, this was never put in, and no one really actually knows what it was meant to be anyway.
But you
at this
did
point.
adopt it.
30 years ago.
So I would recommend that these two strategies then get yeses across the board and then become a priority. Because if it's an adopted zoning
already
bylaw,
done.
then it needs to be looked at. No matter, even if there's ends in here, if we were to do it, you need to fix it.
Yeah.
And it needs to be brought to the attention of,
Right, this is a
Needs
fix.
to be included into the zoning bylaws, right?
Yes.
yeah.
To me, this is more, it needs a comment after. It's not only yes, but this is a real priority because we're not creating anything new here.
No,
This is something that
We're
should be
implementing something that's
in writing.
30 years later, yeah. But I mean, the last part was to clarify its intent in relation to the cluster development, though, no? So it wasn't
And
that this,
revise regulations to clarify its intent and make consistent with regulations in other areas of the zoning bylaws,
Right.
such as the cluster development
right.
provisions.
So it's not saying that it itself is not necessarily not clear, it's just, they want it
Clarify
specified
the purpose.
how it relates to these other things, so that it's situated and it's given a context, which now is lost
Because
completely.
it sounds like we're talking about what it already lost at farmland, cluster development. There's clearly a difference between regular cluster developments. So I don't know if there's a
Yeah,
higher level meaning to farmland, if there's
Well-
regulations to that,
Right, or I'm guessing maybe it allows you to
farm buildings.
preserve farmland by tightening the frontage required, for example.
Right.
So you
Keep more
have the same
land.
number of houses in a tighter space, kind of like open space, similar, I think,
Yeah.
but it's for farming. I'm guessing. But
Probably instead of
I believe that
farm
whatever
buildings
we put
everywhere.
here for this one, we should put for that 8-2B.
It's already in there.
You threw it in there?
Mike's like, got it.
yeah. Well, that's
We don't have to
cool.
reinvent that wheel.
I mean, it's just, it becomes a huge bang at the committees or applicants when you have bylaws not
Right.
actually on the book, right?
Well-
Like,
That's absolutely right, and any committee can only function within what is actually officially on the books. They
Right.
can't say, well, it should have been there. And-
Right,
and
right.
we have to, you can't deny an application for something,
No one
either
knows.
a subdivision or a lot. I mean,
well, I just think about the two that are on the two subdivisions on Pleasant Street, right?
right.
Like, those to me seems like they would be perfectly applicable to this
Yes.
preservation district in the zoning, and I think to myself, so what is in the that zoning definition that we didn't follow for those specific
Right.
developments,
Those were
right?
both-
Because they're both very different developments too, right? So you can tell they didn't follow the same design book, because one is much larger lots, much larger homes, the other ones are smaller homes, smaller lots. So, I would just,
It goes back to what, 1990, you said, George? It's 1990?
1990. It was adopted in 1990.
I'm going to find that car that got stolen.
It sounds like they started talking about it in 86.
Well,
Okay, well, let's keep on moving here then.
Reconsider the draft open space residential development bylaw drafted in '06 by the PVPC under a smart growth technical assistance grant.
I remember when we discussed this many months ago when we were in this chapter, we missed the opportunity, we talked about missing the opportunity to get whatever grant it was that was available. And we didn't jump on that. We, the town, not we, the committee.
So that has, yeah, so that,
I don't know if it's still
are
available.
you saying these smart growth technical assistance grants may no longer be available?
Well, I'm saying I don't know.
Right, so
That's what I'm
this
saying.
Yeah.
really,
It might be that needs to be looked at. To me, that looks like a priority that should be looked into. That could help us on many of these particular, and there he goes.
Grants are available.
Land use practices.
Yeah.
This is interesting.
Planning grants.
Housing choice.
Yeah, so I mean, priorities for program.
Here's smart.
It's a listed priority, right? So I think
Zoning.
planning assistant grants, planning assistant,
May
yeah.
24th.
Zoning that results in,
Great.
Deadline to respond, May 24th.
Yep.
well,
Is it already June, guys? Is that, I know.
At 5 PM.
That's for the 2019. I mean, we.
So
Well, if we
under,
hurry up, we'll be
ready
we'll
for
be there
20.
for 20.
and then they
So
have,
they're still out there.
then they have fiscal year 20 planning assistant grants.
Yes.
Just click on that link. See what that says, if there's any priorities set. Oh, boy.
response due
Land use
date, May
practices.
24th, 2019.
It
That's
says
for
May
19.
24th.
2019.
That's
Well,
not, that's
The
not.
2020 grant.
Oh, that would
They
be
would-
probably coming out of
Because of
fiscal
fiscal
year
year.
20 years
20 money.
Yeah, we'll need.
So to get them approved, but they wouldn't actually award the grant process.
There really are. We
Okay.
become aware of the possibilities of getting grants that we are missing, right, left, up, and down. We even talked about it at one meeting, I think. about
Yeah, because every department head says they're grant writers.
Right.
They're always applying for grants. But
There's money out there.
we never
There really is.
There's
We're
money
not-
out there.
Okay, so theoretically, there was a draft bylaw for open space, which you guys haven't seen yet on the bylaw committee, right, Francine?
No.
Or
No,
is it
but
zoning
actually,
bylaw?
no, some things the bylaw committee won't see. We're just doing the general town
Yeah,
bylaws.
they're-
Each committee
This is
has their own
zoning
very
bylaw.
specific bylaws
Yes,
that they go by.
so specific. Is this one specific?
I
Well,
mean,
yeah, it is specific.
Well,
considering.
It's pretty damn specific. It
Yes.
gives a date
Yeah.
and
I
Right.
would
So is
think.
it measurable?
Yes or no, we do it. We reconsider it. Yes or no, that's pretty measurable. Yes, we did. No, we didn't.
Is it attainable?
Reconsider it,
Possibly.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to have to speak to the
Next year.
select board tomorrow night. so
Next
you-
year, there might be more grants coming for next year.
Yeah.
It is relevant, right?
Yes.
Time bound?
Well, clearly it is time bound
Yes.
because of the
Definitely is.
grant application.
yeah.
We missed.
Inclusive and
2021.
equitable.
Yes, yes.
Fiscal year 2021.
Yeah.
Assess the likely impacts of proposed sewer and water infrastructure extensions on open space.
I mean, I
But
think
where-
that comes along with what we've talked about all along, just
Yes.
Right.
having more research on, what it's gonna look like for the town.
So is it specific?
That's the likely impacts.
Well, there's obviously been something proposed already as an extension, right, somewhere?
So I would skip right to relevant and say, why would we put water and sewer in open space areas? You generally follow the roadway.
Right.
No, it
Well, if
says,
they had to go through open space to hook up, is how I read that.
You should go down
Ooh,
the
there's a
road.
road to every house.
I think it has to do with assessing the impact. It doesn't say it's going to,
Oh,
Likely
I think it's
impacts.
just going to
Okay.
assess the impact.
All right.
If you have an open space,
Will it have an impact?
one
not
would
if you put it in the road.
Right.
Well, maybe it's saying if you really bring in water and sewer, then you're going to lose open space because now the land is developable that, for example, is not perkable, but now you bring in sewer, so it's now developable, so you lose open space.
well,
How come they didn't say that?
It's a mouthful.
Right, I mean, what you said was very
Right, that
specific.
makes
What this
sense.
said is not specific.
You're right, and I'm speculating, I'm interpreting it,
Right.
we're back to interpreting it. These are not well written, in my opinion, a lot of them.
we've said
If we could
that.
just take it at face value and assume that it's an accurate statement and just respond to that. But it's hard not to drift back into what did they really mean?
Yeah.
Well, I don't really know what they mean by this. That's how I interpret it, but that's the likely impacts. It could also mean that, if you bring in water and sewer infrastructure, then you can allow building, more cluster developments that couldn't, didn't have the capacity for cluster, for septic, and therefore, in a way, preserve open space, because now you want to build more homes or more, so.
You just went way too far,
Yeah,
right?
you just got real deep into it.
So I guess what I'm saying is, this is not well bounded.
Yeah.
To me, you can interpret it a lot of
Yeah.
different ways.
Well, because the other thing is you put 2 or 3 more words in here and you
Change that.
change it, right? You either go from running water and sewer infrastructure through open space or water and infrastructure on adjacent properties and how it affects open space.
It's
So is it specific?
not for me. No. I don't know what it means.
Measurable?
If it's not specific, I feel like it gets
It's not
the, gets
attainable,
the
right?
hammer.
Can't be attainable if you don't define it. It's irrelevant. That's a tough one,
I
right?
think it's,
Yeah, I think.
I mean, it's relevant, but you have to read into the definition too, right?
Yes, that's what we're doing.
So yay or nay?
Yes.
Yes, it's relevant.
I mean, I think we'll get to the point where we're going to look at all these strategies and we're going to rewrite 3/4 of them.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if we could do that.
Time bound.
It's hard,
Blank.
same as all the other time-bound ones.
yeah.
Yeah, and this one's difficult too because the water and sewer is so
That might be a long study.
like there's no
Given that it's not even
schedule to that,
attainable.
right? Like you don't even know if it's attainable, so how in the world could you
No,
make it time bound?
Right, there's a lot of speculation.
And that's sort of, especially the water really operates outside of the town, and the sewer doesn't exist. I mean, except where there are hookups that don't belong to our town anyway.
Inclusive.
Yeah. Equitable. Yeah. Proposed sewer and water infrastructure. What proposed?
Well, I don't think it would be equitable,
Why is?
because it's, I mean, equitable to me means available to all, and I'm not so sure that it's,
So,
Yeah. I mean, we know we
This is
wouldn't put
what's
this
gonna
water and
happen,
sewer in the
yeah.
entire town, so.
No,
that's true.
we wouldn't.
Yeah, but now we're talking about how much infrastructure we're putting in. I mean,
not gonna happen.
assessing the impacts. I mean, yeah, that could be equitable.
The thing about our town that I'm understanding in terms of the actual dirt is that we have pretty good percolable soil, and, it's not like it's not like we're an urban area that needs a big town sewer, except for the development of
More industrial
retail,
kinds of.
industrial, or commercial.
Well, not even.
Residentially, we're not doing too bad, with our, I mean, everybody's doing.
And there's still a lot of commercial and other economic development that has no need for a sewer. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be wastewater treated.
Yeah, right,
Depending on the business you have.
depending on the business.
You get the industry, you do, but the normal commercial business doesn't necessarily have to be so complicated. Okay.
Develop a prioritized list of key open space parcels for acquisition based on available development, vacant lands, key natural resource areas, critical habitat, priority agricultural land and soil, recreational lands, expansion, connection to town, wide green network.
That is definitely ongoing.
Yeah,
That's
so-
the open space.
So if it's ongoing, we probably wouldn't rank, right? Because it is following its path today, we are pursuing it.
Open Space Committee kind of takes care of all
How
that.
do we feel about that, yeah?
Yeah.
Probably.
I mean, there's probably some that are gonna say ongoing that we know we're not really
Yeah, but this one,
pursuing, but this one we are,
we
right?
definitely are.
Definitely that one, and B as well. It's definitely, we have a relationship with an existing land trust.
But what we haven't done is prioritized it.
No, but I think that's the responsibility of the Open Space Review Committee to do that, to do
Yeah.
the
Because
prioritization.
I'm looking at all of this stuff,
Yeah,
and while it's all been identified,
right.
there's not been a list from most.
It hasn't
least
come up yet.
important. Right.
I was unable to make the last meeting of the Open Space Review Committee, but I suggested that that be on the agenda, so I don't know the status, but we need to do that. And for example, it would be lands that are contiguous with current
Right.
conserved lands. That would be one criteria. Just for your information, in terms of the follow-up letter that went after we did this series of 3 presentations sponsored by the Open Space Review Committee. Mike spoke at one of them. Turns out that Mark Walmsley from Kestrel Land Trust inserted the fact that he was approached by, I think the number was 6 different landowners, one of which, I don't know who they are, he used the word "are important." So, I mean, somebody that must mean perhaps contiguous to some of our other open space lands, or, and I don't know who it was. So we need to follow up on that. To me, that is the responsibility of the Open Space Review Committee, 4.2A. It is ongoing.
Which, yeah,
Yep. Okay.
okay.
So 4.2B, we're good with?
Yep.
Right. 4.2C, continue to update the town's open space and recreation plan every 5 years in order
Yeah.
to qualify for state
been done.
federal grants.
It's, I think, around, close to being finalized.
Because isn't that the book? That's the
Yeah.
big binder that
That
came to
is
the
the
meeting
binder.
downstairs.
It is very necessary. It's happening. Has it been completed? I don't know.
It's nice to knock out 3 strategies like
Yeah.
that. huh?
Yeah.
Out of there. Yeah, okay.
They're pretty good.
Well, for an ad hoc
Let's do
committee,
more of
open
that.
space.
I like
is
that.
doing its work.
I like when we're currently
And
doing
maybe
things.
that needs to not be an ad hoc
Makes it
committee.
easier.
It's a question that's gonna-
Yeah.
For it.
Well,
Yeah, it is long.
So 4-3, I think this is one I think we jumped to in the beginning when we were just sort of jumping at these to test them out. Establish priority areas and parcels for scenic preservation.
I mean, I feel like that kind of goes along with open space stuff.
Yeah. When they talk about Glendale Road as our big scenic area in town, right? Up by the horse farm, by the winery.
I mean, the goal is to protect and enhance the scenic vistas through the town.
So with that, so those have they're different designations, right?
Right.
The scenic, there's like I think this little thing on your, it's a different district, right? So I think it's a little different on your taxes as well? Or there's an identifier for being in that area with the scenic views.
Yes.
Because like Pleasant Street is that, I think part of East Street is.
Glendale Road, and then part of Glendale
Still
Road
car
is
alarm
that.
went off. It wasn't my car.
Cars going after
I'm
that.
just gonna check.
Tell about like car theft, burglars in town.
Do we want to review this one? Review?
Yeah, we do.
All right, so establish priority area and parcels for scenic preservation. Is it specific?
This is,
It's challenging.
yeah, it really is. It's,
So we don't have that presently.
Well, I think, yeah, so I think areas are designated, but there's not a priority list to add or increase or change.
I see, so it's very static. Here's what's been designated, and then they walked away.
I think so.
And scenic
So,
scenic
there-
preservation is different than conservation preservation, because we've got a
That's
whole
right,
list of
that's
conservation
right.
land preservation here.
I don't think it's been done. It says pending
Yeah.
action.
Is that something for open space committee?
I don't recall that it's come up at all specifically around scenic. It's,
And maybe because of the concentration is somewhere else, right? I mean, the energy is going towards one area and then.
Well, it's almost been kind of like what came up in action taken. In other words, when lands came for sale, one hopes that we could be a little more proactive
Right.
around it,
Yeah.
not wait until it comes up for sale.
Yeah. Well, and that goes down into that 4.4A.
Right, right, exactly, that's 448, right.
So specific,
Where are you now?
still on 4.3A.
3A? Did you already put yes in there?
Those
Well,
were,
we did.
we
like,
did that as a sample.
2 months ago. We jumped through these.
I
We just
see.
tried
When we
to-
started doing it, we'd randomly pick one and then
I see,
assess
right.
it.
I remember that.
I think we don't know if we have any designated, I mean, those areas are talked about as scenic, but there's nothing specific
I
that
agree.
identifies them as scenic areas, I don't think.
Wait, I thought we did have.
I thought there was, because somebody's defined like Pleasant Street to me in part of East Street, and I don't know if it's on a map somewhere.
I can't put my finger on that.
Where on Pleasant Street? Where?
I think it is Pleasant Street. I mean,
The one that's all been developed.
right, but I mean, maybe it's bounded by certain house numbers, but I think it was the road itself, yeah.
I can't say that because I don't know. Maybe so.
I don't think I made it up.
All right, ready?
Why don't you query the committee when you next go,
George
George.
Scott.
Maybe I'm here. CDI.
Scenic views. Okay, scenic views are one element of the cultural landscape. The town of Southampton has multiple scenic views that have been documented in previous plans, such as the 2008 Open Space Plan. Scenic views in combination with scenic roads convey the sense of place for residents and visitors alike.
Is this in our master plan? Is that what
Yes.
you're reading? What page is that?
51.
51.
Protection of these scenic views can be difficult. It can be legally challenging to regulate aesthetics without potentially taking claims. But it is generally understood that communities have the authority under the general welfare function of their police power to impose restrictions that protect scenic views and maintain a high standard of design along certain roadways. However, communities should be careful that scenic protection measures will not be so onerous as to deny all reasonable economic use of a property. Some possible regulations could require sensitive siting or screening of any buildings allowed in the view shed or restrict heights of new buildings. And it gives a little list of like certain places in town.
So included Glendale Road, the Tycomody Reservoir, Coleman Road, View of Mount Tom, Gun
Pleasant
Road,
Street.
Cook Road, Pleasant Street,
Yeah, about that.
I didn't make it up.
Swanson,
Got
Coleman
it.
View, where's that?
In there.
I didn't remember reading it in there, but I
Coleman, must be
remember
Coleman.
it somewhere.
So I was trying to find it, and this is what came up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do we think? Good with the ranking? Good. I'm gonna take a pause here so we can finish the rest of just a couple of the agenda items, if that's all
I think we
right.
should,
Yeah.
because you have to go before the
Yes.
select board
Yeah.
tomorrow night.
We're all getting tired.
Yes.
You got it.
Throw us along.
Old business, select board report out. So tomorrow evening, I'll be reporting out in front of the select board. We have a posted joint meeting if you'd like to attend. I'll be going over what we've done, where we are, our steps going forward, and then talking about some of the opportunities and challenges, some of the wins of the review. Some of the challenges being bylaws not incorporated or bylaws not on the books, right? I mean, that's a big deal for a town, right? You spent legal resources to adopt something and then you didn't even put it on paper for all residents, which means you haven't enforced it. So that's kind of a big deal.
Well, and I think our other thing has been that just with the changing of people and boards and everything, there's not been a central place or a central, or whatever, some level of incentive or motivation for the new people to go in and learn something
Right.
as they take on a new position either. So as a result, it keeps on getting more and more,
It morphs.
Yeah, and I think-
more diffused and more scattered in terms of any
Yeah.
kind of enforcement that there might even be. But
And I think that, especially the bylaw related issue, that comes down to whatever process was in place then, and we've talked about, and I previously talked about this with Francine, like our bylaws, and they're sort of unstructured, and they're not really in a good order. It just seems like with the fragmented departments, with a group adopting a bylaw, you would think that bylaw then goes to the town clerk, and that town clerk incorporates it into the paper document, which should have been scanned into the digital document 20 years after adoption, and that's readily available to everyone. But for some reason, that didn't happen with certain bylaws. There's this one, and there's probably others as well. So it just seems like the process, and the bylaw review committee is looking to review and put these in order, but even a process to make sure all those are incorporated, right? After they're adopted.
Well, I think one of the challenges we're facing is we were like the bylaw review committee, so are we reviewing just existing bylaws, or are we looking ahead a little bit
Right.
yeah.
to plugging gaps in our bylaws
Yeah.
since the last time. I mean, for instance, things like drones. I mean, we're confronted with such things that are very different now than when they were passed
Right.
before. And so I'm sort of getting mixed messages. Are we just looking at the old and reworking it? Are we looking at the old, reworking it, and
No, I would hope we'd be
incorporating
looking to the future.
what our future's gonna look like before it's so far in our
Yeah.
rearview mirror? I
You know,
mean,
you're
I just
doing it
keep
again.
getting
Yeah.
The
lost.
future is here.
Yeah,
It's here.
future day.
Yes.
Yes.
But if every committee, from what I'm understanding, then, if the various committees, so open space and whomever else writes their own bylaws,
Right.
do they eventually get incorporated into the master bylaws?
No, they're referenced in
They're
it.
referenced, but they're
The
not.
very specifics, like the Board of Health bylaws or the Board of Health bylaws, we're just, talking about how the Board of Health fits into the structure and the government of the town in very general terms.
Yeah.
But the specifics of the Board of Health as to, water quality and all this other stuff, waste management, that's not where we go. So,
So there should be an article at the
Making
next
sense.
town meeting to require all local boards, committees, commissions, bylaws to be registered and posted with the town clerk and available online, right? Or available to any means. Just trying to think about the language they use, right, for posting your minutes and things. They need to be posted basically online or available 24 hours a day or during normal business hours. But
And-
making that a requirement, because that's the only way you flush out all these bylaws, right?
but in that, we may find that some of the questions we're asking are already answered.
Already answered
Right.
at that level, yeah,
But we don't know that
That's
because
right.
we don't have it.
yeah.
So, we'll get into that, and then some
Are
other
you,
stuff.
you're not gonna hand this out, right?
No.
Yeah. Okay. 'Cause I think that's-
Oh, much it weighs.
Yeah, you really are, there'll be enough of a
Well, I've waved it around because I think this thing is a real challenge.
Yeah.
It really is, and I don't think we should, I think, undersell it to people. I'm not trying to make a bigger deal out of it, but it really is a complicated
Sure.
process.
And we could go into the detail, it's,
Right.
you get minimal input and feedback, right?
Well,
Because
I
it's a
mean,
lot,
right,
it's a lot, we couldn't have provided feedback when we were originally presented this, because we hadn't read it. And
Right, right. But I think, going through that, like we said, the process of what we've been going through, intentionally reading every chapter to understand it and figure out, what really the intent was at the time, and whether there's, 300 suggestions here, or strategies or whatever, and how you've gone about trying to whittle these down by applying the smarty technique. And you might even just pick out one or two that are kind of easy.
That's right.
And then demonstrate what that smart technique is. Maybe one we've already done that we all agree on, and throw it back to the board.
Well, yeah,
That's a
Show
good
that.
idea.
Because people are watching, they can see how we're trying to do this.
Yes.
And I think,
It's a very thoughtful approach to
yeah, so it's not just, sitting around gabbing for 2 hours, but we're trying to apply this. So if we can, find one in one of these earlier chapters that we've done, one or two that look relatively easy, or, well, mediumly easy.
So I know we have 2 select board members present at this meeting right now, but if I was on the select board, I would probably be saying, what does the Master Plan Implementation Committee consider to be the priorities? I mean, and we don't have those yet, right?
Right.
We haven't. So you don't have them for tomorrow night. We don't have them for tomorrow night. But maybe for the next report out, we, as a committee, can come up with whether it's
At least some general.
a dozen or 4 or 30, whatever we think that would be the ones that should be.
First hits.
I mean, I
Right.
think we have centered topics, right? So conservation as a whole, housing,
Moving forward with infrastructure and
I would say, yeah, so development
Yeah.
and infrastructure, those are big topics. Energy was kind of a minimal topic. Public services and facilities, I mean, conversation was there, but I think those are, a lot of those end up being sort of self-correcting as well, right? Like, you need to take care of your buildings and your facilities, but if you don't, you're going to have to take care of them anyways at some point, right? So what we're dealing with is sort of the policy direction of some of the bylaws, and so conservation, development.
But
land use is obviously tied in there. Those, like I said, that's kind of that's like that add-on chapter that should have been incorporated into
What were you gonna say?
I
open
guess,
space, but-
I was thinking, I feel a little bit about this committee as I do about the bylaw committee. It's like looking in the rearview mirror and trying to fix that. Should we be looking ahead so that we're going forward? And are we doing enough of that in this? And I don't know what flexibility we have, but for instance, having somebody come about fiber optics, or having somebody come and talk about putting a solar field in, or a wind, I mean, to me, that's what today's master plan needs to be.
Right.
And I just feel like we're fixing yesterday's master plan. Or you're taking some good ideas and rolling them into the future,
Yeah.
but
Well, if you go
I've
through a
gotta
whole new
figure out
master
how
plan
we're gonna
process,
do this.
half the stuff that's in this is going to be, or more than half the stuff that's in this is going to be in the new one, right? So there may be more emphasis on renewable energy or
Okay.
different types of mobility options or different things,
Right.
but in general,
Okay.
I think you'll still have the same basic, like,
Principles.
yeah, you're going to look at the same major topics with some other goals and
But, yeah,
suggestions that are maybe
that's-
a
I
little
don't
more
want to be
timely.
limited to these. I
Right.
No.
need to
No, I
be
think
driving
we're gonna
it forward.
I think we're
But
gonna
I-
end up getting rid of, like a third of these and like completely rewording, keeping the overarching idea, but rewording
Yes.
2/3 of them.
Yeah.
So that
It's
in
more
10
like
years, they're not
looking
looking,
at
trying to
where we're
figure out
going.
what we meant.
Well, in 10 years, they should be
Because we
creating a
should
new one.
have some of these things.
Right.
10 years, they should have a new one drafted, ready to go, right? Because we'll mark all of ours as complete, because we'll get them all done.
But I think in terms of your point, Cindy, in terms of the priorities, I don't think we would want to go back and say, okay, well, out of everything we've read, we think that, land use is the most important thing, and we think the town really needs to focus on land use for the next 3 years or whatever. I mean, I think it's got to be broader than
That's right.
that, right?
Yes,
Gotta-
yes.
A little bit of, maybe not a little bit of every chapter, but at least 4 or 5 different
Recognition
kinds of
of them.
things that
Yes,
that maybe
yes, we
tie
don't
together,
wanna-
but it's not so narrow that we're just focusing on one topic, I
I
guess
think
I would
the
say.
biggest thing, even as vague as it may sound, is the growth of the town. I mean,
Mhm.
and that includes
Lots of things.
And how does the
use
town
and
choose to drive it?
infrastructure, and how we're going to aid
Yeah.
or stop that,
Sure.
slow that down.
Because that does hit every chapter, right?
Right, that's how we started. I think that's, you talk about what's the priority, that smart growth thing to me is that jumps out as a
Yeah,
priority.
me too.
Because that encompasses so many other things that we've been talking about. And in the end, smart growth, the town will define what smart growth is for this town. May be very different than what Westfield defines as smart growth, because we're not Westfield. And that's appropriate.
And maybe there's, so after we review all these chapters, maybe there's 20
Great.
that fall under smart growth, right? It could be tackled through smart growth, through a PVPC interaction, through some sort of grant funding that takes these 20 strategies and says, you're now under smart growth, and this is master plan subsection 1, right? This is what they move forward with, and then there's others that you handle locally that you can do. Maybe that's how that works, I don't know. Good. Any other new business? Any other necessary business that cannot wait until the next regular meeting? Let's schedule the next meeting.
So the next meeting is tomorrow night.
And so you all know that the Westfield, I communicated that.
The Westfield fiber optics. Right. Yes.
So are they starting off?
They're going to be like third on the agenda.
I think,
I mean,
yeah,
Mike,
Mike's
I think
ahead.
there's some business things going first, then Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, it always shows,
And then-
I've always found that every time I'm on the agenda to go there, I'm always first, and then they talk about a bunch of things ahead of that.
Well, if I look at,
I don't think I'm going to get there till 7:30, probably the earliest.
you can watch it.
Yes.
I may be late also. I have to go to New Hampshire tomorrow.
Should be
Try to
recorded.
be here on time.
I should be there on time, but I'll probably have to leave early.
So next meeting, the 8th at 7. I tried to stagger this so it doesn't conflict with Conservation Commission. Because we fought so hard to get a representative.
I know.
Your meetings always go.
So I will not be able to come.
Okay.
Well, it is summer, so we know.
Vacations.
Yes, right. So,
So you're saying what, July 8th?
Yeah, you'll see me a month after July 8th.
Way.
Yeah.
be away too. It's going to happen. I will be able to be here.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any
I
school.
think the 8th will be good, and then it may, we'll see what forward schedules look like
Right,
after that.
So the 8th,
If you do another 2 weeks after that, I'll be gone.
I will not be available the 22nd either. Yeah.
Yeah, so we may end up taking the rest of July off, which is great.
Okay.
yeah, no,
Which is great.
So I'm gone for
August is
2
going to be dead too. for
plus
me.
weeks at the end usually. So,
so we're looking at the 8th?
yeah, we'll do the 8th, and then we'll kind of reevaluate next meeting at that point.
Okay. I may be iffy for the 8th, well,
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay.
July 8th. All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
At what time?